had to sew up the courthouse and go up to the guy and shake his hand. This is one reason why every election season, oh, George Washington bought beer. They did that because they're asking you, as a landowner, to travel some period of distance and length of time to sew up at the courthouse. So it's kind of like if you're going to some meeting and they don't have a buffet tray. Like, what's going on here? So it was expected of the candidates to put a spread out, and since beer is safer than water, it was. This would include beer. Now, in a group like this, with the Pennsylvania Assembly, I think they have votes, so you write them down.
Would they put some sheets of like papers
I think
into
they
the
would.
box and
Yeah.
it would be counted?
Now, the Pennsylvania Patriot Commonwealth Assembly had a bill brought before it to have bills read bilingually, English and German, because there were a noted percent of them who spoke German, and it's something of an exercise of their political power. The vote didn't succeed, but since it happened in the same room that the texts that create the United States happen, sometimes that floats up. There's the group of founders voted to have German. No, it's the Pennsylvania Assembly that did that. You got me thinking, though. As to how they would, I think they would do it by hand vote, and then if that was too close, you could maybe go to paper. But I think that's how they do it. This is why I like when it gets quiet after 5, that I get questions I really have to think about. But a point is that Pennsylvania, and indeed the other colonies, had a long history through the end of the 17th, and sometimes in some colonies back to the middle and beginning of the 17th century through the 18th century of elected assemblies that would have some power. And arguably the British government didn't quite handle that correctly, because the British government did have a point that after the battles and the wars that in Europe are known as the 7 Years' War, and over here are called the French and Indian War, the British had spent a pretty good amount of money, to say the least, defending the colonies and what they ought to pay for it. It's just that they handled that not too effectively and got colonists all riled up and then continued to rile them up, or as one of the petitions sent by the Continental Congress arrived in London on a day that Parliament thought they had something better to do, the opening of grouse hunting season. So junior member so-and-so's clerk handled the text coming in. You may not have wanted to do that. You might have wanted to address this a bit more effectively.
The counties broke loose. Neglected for too long.
Yeah. If Parliament and the king had handled it more effectively, they could have created for themselves a fantastic Pan-Atlantic empire. But they didn't, and everything went into a mess. And part of the reason is that the colonies, to a great degree, been pretty much left to their own devices for generations. They pass their own bills. In a place like Pennsylvania, they funded their own government, because this is a proprietary colony, so William and his descendants in an assembly had the power to run it, but they did have to figure out how to pay for it. Virginia, being a royal crown colony, their governors are lords, and their funding came straight from Parliament. An advantage, things would get built quicker. A flip side of that being there was a official printer for Virginia, so there weren't too many other printers in Virginia. Whereas here in Pennsylvania, down, say, 3rd and Market, down the front, you had 20, 30 different printers down there, including one, Ben Franklin. So you do have a whole lot of, arguably a bit more exchanging of ideas going on here than you might have in some of the other colonies. Also, that's kind of also means that the Declaration of Independence was translated into and then typeset into German. It was printed up in German after about a week after it had been printed up in English. Now let's see here. I think I got some new folks in here. Next for sign. Both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were signed in here. First week in July of 1776, on Tuesday, the Continental Congress in here votes to break away from Great Britain. On Wednesday, as it had been on and off for about, 6 days, the Declaration of Independence was debated in here, and the text itself was approved on Thursday, 4th of July. The text is printed up Thursday night into Friday. There are about 200 or 300 copies in a first print run. This is not one of them, but it looks like it. So out they go, they're put in newspapers and read to the public. They all had at the top today, July 4th. So even though the vote was 2 days before, these got out and everything about independence is tied to the day. But I would have thought that you all don't first up think of the Declaration of Independence that's been typeset. What you know it from is the handwriting of a clerk. Yeah, let's see. His name's Timothy Matlack. He was hired to prepare a formal version signed in here beginning the 2nd of August. And that's in the National Archives. So if you're from around the District of Columbia, you're heading to Washington, D.C. tonight, tomorrow morning, Mr. Matlack's writing, signed August, dated 4th of July. 11 years later, another group met in here, and that's the group that in the summer of 1787 puts together the same Constitution that's still used. And that group, well, the man in charge of it was George Washington. He's in that original chair. And Ben Franklin's out here somewhere, and Franklin was overheard saying, as the Constitution was being signed, that he often looked at the half-sun on the chair and wondered if it was a rising or a setting sun, and length had the happiness to call it a rising and not a setting sun. So that's the basics. I think what I'm going to do now, we rotate around a little bit. So, you want to come in, Don, or do you want to go get? Okay. And my colleague here will kind of take the question flow and see where that goes.
An abolitionist publication, the Anti-Slavery Record, referred to it as the Liberty Bell. And a poem written a few years later demanded,
"Ring loud that hallowed bell, ring it till the slave be free."
Thus, the Pennsylvania State House bell became America's Liberty Bell. After a long and bloody civil war, slavery was abolished throughout the United States. Yet the fight was far from over, and the debate continued regarding the true meaning of liberty in America. The bell as a symbol began its role as a national lightning rod, a focus of celebration by some and protest by